One signature, one moment, and the U.S. economy is teetering on the edge of a trade war that could reshape North America. On June 4, 2025, President Donald Trump unleashed a 50% tariff on Canadian steel, aluminum, and more, declaring Canada can't survive without American markets. But in Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney isn't backing down. He's turning Trump's own policy into a weapon against the U.S. Detroit's factories are shutting down, workers are losing jobs, and Canada's steel mills are pivoting to Asia and Europe, seizing control of the supply chain. This isn't just a trade spat. It's a geopolitical showdown that could cripple American industry and leave Main Street footing the bill. Let's unravel how Trump's tariff gamble is backfiring, how Carney's outsmarting him, and why the U.S. is staring down an economic reckoning. Trump's second term began with a bold claim. Canada relies too heavily on the U.S. and can't function without it. During his first cabinet meeting, he doubled down, escalating trade wars with the EU, Japan, and Canada. The 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, followed by threats on copper and pharmaceuticals, were meant to force Ottawa into a quick deal. A single Ford F-150 uses a ton of steel, and with 1.5 million trucks planned annually, Ford's costs spiked by $500 million as steel prices jumped from $700 to $900 per ton in days. Detroit's factories, from GM to Chrysler, stalled as Canada, which supplies 12 million tons of steel yearly to the U.S., halted exports. Michigan's unemployment surged to 5.4%, a point above the national 4.1% average, while the S&P dropped 0.75% in a session traders called a Trump session teaser. This wasn't protectionism saving jobs. It was a policy choking America's industrial core. Carney saw an opening where Trump saw leverage. Canada's steel, 90% of which once flowed south, faced a crisis, but Carney turned it into opportunity. On July 16, 2025, he launched a $1 billion steel modernization fund, shifting Ontario's mills to electric arc and hydrogen furnaces powered by a 93% emissions-free grid of hydro and nuclear energy. This made Canadian steel 3 to 4 times greener than the global average, poised to bypass Europe's 2026 Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBM, which will tax high-emission steel at $90 per ton. U.S. mills, 63% coal-powered, face double taxation, 50% at home and $90 abroad, while Canada's steel fetches premiums in Rotterdam and Busan. Hamilton's ArcelorMittal Dofasco is retooling with a new direct reduced iron unit, cutting 5 million tons of emissions yearly. As U.S. automakers scramble, Canada's redirecting steel to global markets, leaving Detroit's assembly lines idle. Trump's tariffs extended beyond metals, targeting Canadian pharmaceuticals, lumber, and cars with a 25% tariff on non-U.S. content in vehicles. This hit Canada hard, but Carney played a strategic game, knowing Trump's bold threats often led to quiet carve-outs. When Trump threatened a 50% copper tariff, Carney anticipated the retreat. Trump scaled back, hitting only pipes and wiring while sparing ores, concentrates, and cathodes. Carney leveraged this to preserve key exemptions under the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, focusing on tariff-free trade for most goods. Dan Kelly of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business noted that while sectoral tariffs stung, CUSMA's protections kept most manufactured goods flowing freely. Carney's strategy was to secure these exemptions and use metals as bargaining chips in broader talks. Carney's masterstroke was a warning. Canada could halt power exports to the U.S., which supplies 60 terawatt-hours annually, enough to power 5 million homes in the Northeast and Midwest. This wasn't bluster. It was a reminder of Canada's leverage. Trump's tariffs might choke steel, but Canada could darken American factories and homes. On July 22, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario mandated that all new infrastructure, pipelines, rail spurs, service roads, use Canadian steel, locking U.S. pipe mills out. Canada's 6.56 million tons of steel exports to the U.S., including over 1 million tons of oil country tubular goods, OCTG, now stay north or bypass U.S. customs for global markets. Ottawa slashed quotas for tube and pipe from non-free trade countries by 50%, hitting excess imports with a 50% duty. Texas and North Dakota drillers face 15% higher OCTG costs, while midstream firms lose $100 million bids to Alberta's local steel mandates. Europe's CBM, launching January 1, 2026, piles on the pressure. With EU carbon allowances at $88.95 per ton, U.S. steel faces a $90 per ton tax, while Canada's low-carbon steel sails through. EU buyers are shifting to Canadian steel, redirecting truckloads from Michigan to Antwerp. The Tax Foundation estimates Trump's tariffs cost U.S. households $1,296 yearly, a month's groceries gone. Detroit's execs face a grim choice: pay Europe's carbon toll and lose global price wars, or stick with coal-fed furnaces and eat 50% duties at home. Margins, already thin from the pandemic chip shortage, are vanishing. Carney outmaneuvered Trump on the global stage. While Trump secured a 15% tariff on EU goods with no exemptions, Carney ensured Canada wasn't treated worse. On July 21st, Great Lakes senators pleaded with Carney in Ottawa to ease the metal blockade. Carney offered only export quota talks, keeping steel in Canada. Canadian negotiators Kirsten Hillman and Dominic LeBlanc slowed the clock, preserving CUSMA carve-outs. As Trump pushed for an Apex summit win, Carney gave him a headline: a deal that seemed like progress but favored Canada. CUSMA exemptions held for most goods. Steel and aluminum stayed at 50%, but were set for global review, and copper tariffs spared Canada's cathode exports. Dan Kelly called it not ideal, but livable. Canadian businesses felt immediate relief. A CFIB survey showed 70% of small businesses importing from the U.S. absorbed a $9,000 median hit from Canada's retaliatory tariffs since March, but a 15% across-the-board tariff was avoided. Catherine Foran-Lefebvre of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce called the 50% metal tariffs egregious, but praised CUSMA's preserved exemptions. Drew Fagan from the University of Toronto's Monk School noted a 2% average tariff on Canadian products, up from 0.2%, but far better than a 15% disaster. Carney's long game was to take hits in select sectors to protect the broader economy. The U.S. is reeling. Michigan's 5.4% unemployment reflects laid-off workers and struggling small businesses tied to auto manufacturing. Showroom prices for cars, appliances, and construction materials are soaring, forcing consumers to delay purchases. The energy sector faces 15% higher OCTG costs, with maintenance crews scavenging stockpiles. Building new U.S. mills takes years, and rerouting crude by rail spikes costs and risks. Canada's mills, retooling with clean energy, are positioning for global leadership. The 2026 CUSMA review looms as Canada's next chance to shape trade terms. Trump claimed victory, but Carney secured Canada's lifelines, proving toughness and foresight. The U.S. must choose: escalate the tariff war and risk a 2008-style collapse, or pivot to compete in a world moving on.